The helicopter blades sliced through the July heat above the rugged mountains of Choix, Sinaloa. Below, a convoy of Mexican Navy trucks crept up the dirt road, headlights cutting through the dust. They weren't chasing a myth. They were after a man who had escaped the law for almost 4 decades. Rafael Caro Quintero, once known as the Narco of Narcos. Born in the small town of La Noria, in the state of Sinaloa, Caro Quintero had started like many others, poor, ambitious, and surrounded by the drug fields of the 1970s Mexican countryside. By his mid-20s, he had built a network so vast that American agents described it as the first true cartel in modern Mexico, the Guadalajara Cartel. He was intelligent, calculating, and ruthless in business. Under his control, marijuana and cocaine flowed north across the border like never before, bringing millions in profit and attention from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. But power always invites danger. In 1985, one of the DEA's most respected agents, Enrique Kiki Camarena, infiltrated the Guadalajara network. His work exposed millions of dollars in operations and threatened the cartel's future. What happened next would forever change U.S.-Mexico relations. When Camarena vanished outside the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, the world didn't yet know the storm that was coming. Days later, his body was discovered, the result of an interrogation ordered by cartel leaders, including Caro Quintero. The murder of a U.S. federal agent on Mexican soil became a political earthquake. The U.S. launched Operation Leyenda, the largest DEA investigation in history at the time. Within months, Caro Quintero's empire began to crumble. He was captured in Costa Rica, extradited to Mexico, and sentenced to 40 years in prison. For decades, his name faded into the background, replaced by newer figures like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But unlike most, Caro Quintero's story didn't end behind bars. In 2013, after 28 years in prison, a Mexican court ordered his release on a technicality. The news stunned the DEA and set off an international outrage. Within days, Mexico's Attorney General's office admitted the release was a mistake, but by then, the drug lord had vanished. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him. For nearly a decade, rumors swirled. Some said he was hiding in the Sierra Madre mountains under the protection of local communities. Others claimed he was quietly rebuilding his influence, guiding a new generation of traffickers from the shadows. The DEA placed a $20 million bounty on his head, one of the highest ever for a single fugitive. Yet he remained invisible. Until 2022, that summer morning, as the sun broke over the Sinaloa hills, a special unit of the Mexican Navy, guided by intelligence from the U.S., began moving toward a small rural property. The man they sought was older now, his face lined by years of evasion, but still sharp, still known as El Príncipe, the prince. He believed the mountains had kept him safe. Then the dogs started barking. A Navy canine named Max led the team through thick brush toward a cluster of abandoned buildings. Moments later, soldiers surrounded the area. Hidden inside a dense thicket, they found Rafael Caro Quintero, crouched among weeds and branches, wearing a blue shirt and jeans. He didn't resist. The fugitive who once commanded an empire was led away by armed Marines and a single dog. As the helicopter lifted off with Caro Quintero on board, the dust settled over Choix. For many, it was the closing of a chapter that had haunted Mexico and the United States for nearly 40 years. But for others, investigators, journalists, and those who remembered Kiki Camarena, it wasn't closure. It was a reminder that history has a way of circling back. Because every empire leaves behind shadows. And this capture wasn't just the end of a man. It was the symbol of a war that never truly ended. Long before the name cartel became global news, Mexico's drug trade was scattered, small, unorganized, and mostly confined to remote farmlands. It was in this world that Rafael Caro Quintero, Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo saw opportunity. They weren't street criminals. They were businessmen with a vision to centralize the fragmented drug trade into a single, organized network. In the late 1970s, they formed what would later be known as the Guadalajara Cartel, Mexico's first true drug trafficking empire. The rise of the triad. Caro Quintero handled the logistics, the money, the land, and the transport routes. Felix Gallardo, a former police officer, built relationships with politicians and high-ranking officials. Fonseca Carrillo managed the smuggling corridors that connected Mexico's Pacific coast to the U.S. border. Together, they built a multi-million-dollar enterprise under the protection of corruption that ran deep into government offices. Their operations stretched from Sinaloa's fertile valleys to the deserts of Chihuahua and Sonora. In the heart of Zacatecas, Caro Quintero oversaw one of the largest marijuana plantations ever discovered, Rancho Buffalo, a massive 1,000-hectare field employing hundreds of workers. For years, it produced tons of marijuana worth billions in today's money, protected by armed guards and political silence. But every empire attracts attention. The arrival of Kiki Camarena. By the early 1980s, the DEA had begun focusing on Mexico, especially after discovering how the Guadalajara Cartel controlled almost all drug routes into the United States. One of their most determined agents was Enrique Kiki Camarena, a former U.S. Marine stationed at the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara. Camarena was different. He spoke fluent Spanish, built trust with locals, and got closer to the cartel's activities than anyone before him. He collected evidence of bribery, airstrips, and trafficking networks. In 1984, thanks to his work, Mexican soldiers raided Rancho Buffalo, burning thousands of tons of marijuana and causing an estimated loss of $8 billion to the cartel. To the cartel, it was a declaration of war. The turning point. After the raid, paranoia spread among cartel leaders. They believed there was a leak, someone feeding intelligence to the Americans. Not long after, in February 1985, Camarena was abducted outside the U.S. consulate. His driver was taken too. Both disappeared for days. When their bodies were found, it set off an international crisis. The U.S. accused the Guadalajara Cartel's leadership, including Caro Quintero, of ordering and participating in the crime. The pressure from Washington was immediate and immense. The Mexican government, under U.S. diplomatic heat, began dismantling the once untouchable empire. Fonseca Carrillo was arrested first. Then came Caro Quintero's capture in Costa Rica after a frantic international manhunt. Finally, Gallardo was detained, marking the end of the Guadalajara Cartel's dominance. The empire fractures, but destruction breeds evolution. The fall of Guadalajara created something far more dangerous: fragmentation. Out of its ruins rose smaller, more violent groups, each taking a piece of the old routes and territories. The Sinaloa Cartel, the Tijuana Cartel, and the Juarez Cartel. Each new group carried the DNA of Caro Quintero's creation: organization, violence, and deep corruption. From the ashes of his empire, Mexico's modern drug war was born. Caro Quintero, once the face of power, now sat in a prison cell. Yet even behind bars, his name echoed through the criminal underworld. Younger traffickers spoke of him with a strange mix of respect and fear. He had shown them that one man could bend the system, and for that, the legend of El Narco de Narcos only grew stronger. As the years passed, his world changed. New cartels rose, alliances shifted, the violence spread, and somewhere within those prison walls, Rafael Caro Quintero began to plan for the one thing no one thought possible: freedom. For nearly 3 decades, Rafael Caro Quintero had lived behind bars. He was older, grayer, and mostly forgotten by the new generation of traffickers who now ruled Mexico's underworld. The Guadalajara Cartel was long gone, replaced by ruthless successors: Sinaloa, Tijuana, Juarez, and Gulf cartels, all born from the ashes of his empire. But in the summer of 2013, something happened that stunned the world. It wasn't a daring jailbreak, nor a violent prison riot. It was a court ruling, a legal loophole that would open the door to one of the most controversial releases in Mexican history, a technicality in the law. On August 9, 2013, a state court in Jalisco ruled that Caro Quintero had been improperly tried in federal court instead of a state one. The judges declared that his 40-year sentence for the 1985 murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was invalid. With that decision, they ordered his immediate release after 28 years in prison. The news spread through Mexico like wildfire. Journalists gathered outside the prison gates. Families of Camarena's colleagues were in disbelief, and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration issued an emergency statement. Rafael Caro Quintero should have remained behind bars for the rest of his life. His release is deeply troubling. But inside the Puente Grande prison near Guadalajara, the man himself remained calm. He walked out quietly, wearing a plain white shirt and jeans, escorted not by guards, but by lawyers and family. No helicopters, no gunfire, just silence. He had walked free through the front door, vanishing into thin air. By the time Mexican authorities realized the error and issued a new arrest warrant, it was too late. Caro Quintero had disappeared. The trail went cold almost instantly. Some said he fled into the Sierra Madre Occidental Mountains, where he had allies and deep connections dating back decades. Others believed he crossed into Central America, using the same routes he once used for smuggling. But for nearly a decade, he seemed to vanish from existence. During those years, rumors filled the void. Whispers of him being protected by local communities circulated in Sinaloa, the birthplace of many cartel legends. There were stories that he lived humbly, surrounded by farmers who saw him as one of their own. And other reports suggested he quietly returned to business, advising younger traffickers within the Sinaloa cartel, particularly those loyal to Ismael El Mayo Zambada. No photos, no verified sightings, only fragments of intelligence, too scattered to act upon. The DEA never forgot. In Washington, the DEA refused to let his case fade away. Caro Quintero's name remained at the top of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The United States government announced a $20 million reward for information leading to his capture, one of the largest bounties ever placed on a single fugitive. For them, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice for Agent Camarena, whose murder had changed the course of DEA operations forever. Agents who had been children when the case began were now veterans, still chasing the same man their mentors had once pursued. Life in the shadows. While the world moved on, in the quiet valleys of northern Mexico, locals told stories. A man who resembled Caro Quintero was seen buying supplies in small towns. Always alone, always careful. He was said to live in a simple wooden cabin, often changing location, never staying long. He no longer commanded armies or empires. He was a ghost, one that both governments and cartels feared to disturb. For almost 10 years, he lived as a shadow of the past. But the past has a way of catching up. In 2022, U.S. intelligence once again began tracking whispers from Sinaloa. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and ground reports all pointed to a single name: Caro Quintero. He was alive and hiding in plain sight. The DEA shared the intelligence with Mexico's Marina, the Navy. A joint operation began in silence, involving drones, surveillance aircraft, and an elite canine unit. The mission's target: the most wanted man in Mexico. The stage is set. On the morning of July 15, 2022, the hunt finally came to an end. High above the rugged landscape of Choix, Navy helicopters circled. Down below, a small dog named Max picked up a scent in the brush. In a few minutes, the silence of the mountains would break, and a story that began in the 1970s would finally reach its closing chapter. But before the world could celebrate the capture, tragedy struck again. A Navy helicopter carrying several Marines involved in the operation crashed on the way back, killing 14 service members. The cause was later reported as an accident, but for many, it was a grim reminder that in Mexico's long war on drugs, even victories come with loss. Caro Quintero was taken into custody alive. His arrest made global headlines. He was photographed sitting against the dirt, handcuffed, looking both exhausted and resigned, as if he had known this moment was inevitable.